The Supreme Court justice had turned back toward the car. He already had one hand on the door. "Do it, Mitchie." "I got him," Mitch said, and there was another sharp pop. This time Ponte went down for real, and the entire block in front of the Harmon was thrown into full-blown pandemonium. Denny watched the street while Mitch broke down. A steady rain had started to fall, but that didn't stop hundreds of people in very nice evening wear from scattering like cockroaches up and down the block. "What's going on, Denny?" Mitch had already packed the scope, stock, and magazine away. Denny motioned Mitch over. "Come here. You should see this. It's amazing what you've done." Mitch seemed torn, but when Denny waved him over again, he set down his gear and duck-walked back to the ledge. Then he peered at his work. The Harmon looked like some kind of glass-fronted insane asylum. Police flashers were already rolling in the street, and the only people not moving down there were the two bodies laid out on the sidewalk. "You know what that's called?" Denny said. "That's mission accomplished. Couldn't have gone better." Mitch shook his head. "I'm messed up, Denny. That second shot don't mean nothing now. You just soak this shit up for a minute and enjoy it. I'll get us ready to go." Denny stepped back and started securing the clasps on Mitch's pack while Mitch watched transfixed. "Not bad for nice work, right, Mitchie?" "Yeah," Mitch said, only half out loud, more to himself than anything. "Kind of awesome, actually." "And who's the hero of the story, bro?" "We are, Denny." "That's right, real, live American heroes. Nobody can ever take that away from you, no matter what. Understand?" Mitch didn't even answer this time except to nod. It was as if, once he'd gotten a glimpse, he couldn't tear his eyes from the scene. A second later, Mitch was dead, with a bullet in his head. The poor guy probably didn't even hear Denny's muzzled Walther go off. It happened that fast. Just as well. It was a goddamn awful business sometimes. The least Denny could do for him was make it quick and professional. "Sorry, Mitchie. Couldn't be helped," he said. Then he picked up Mitch's pack, left everything else, and headed for the stairs without looking back at the evening's third homicide.
I'd been working at the Daily Building when the first terrible report came in, and this time I was on the scene within minutes of the gunfire. I tried hard to ignore the chaos in the street, tried not to think about the victims, not yet, and focused on the one thing I needed to know most. Where did the shots come from? Was it possible they'd made a mistake this time? An MPD sergeant on the sidewalk had an initial report that Cornelia Summers had gone down first, and that she'd been on George Ponte's left as they headed into the Harmon. 2 Supreme Court justices. Even now it seemed unbelievable. I looked to the left, down F Street. The Jackson Graham building was a possibility, but if I'd been the gunman, I would have gone for the National Building Museum. It was a couple of blocks up, well clear of the scene, and had a flat roof with plenty of cover. "Get me 3 more uniforms," I told the sergeant. "Right away. I'm going to that building, the National." Within minutes, we were down the street and pounding on the museum's front doors. One very alarmed-looking security guard came running to let us in. The Federal Protective Service had jurisdiction here, but I'd been told it would be a good half hour before they could get a team on site. "We need to get to the roof," I told the guard. His tag said, "David Hale. What's the fastest way up there?" I left one patrol officer behind to radio in for a full lockdown of the building, and the rest of us followed Hale through the museum's central hall. It was a huge open space with Corinthian columns all the way to the ceiling, which was several stories overhead. That's where we needed to go. Hale brought us to an emergency exit at the far corner. "Straight up," he said. We left him there and took the stairs in rough formation, leapfrogging one flight at a time with flashlights and weapons drawn. At the top, we came to a fire door. It should have been alarmed, but the metal housing was on the ground, and the mechanism itself was hanging loose by a couple of wires. My heart was already pounding from the run. It notched up again now. We'd come to the right place. When I opened the door, an empty expanse of roof was in front of me, with the top of the accountability office visible across G Street beyond that. The rain was coming down hard, but you could still hear the sirens and shouting coming from the Harmon. I signaled for one officer to go right, and the other to follow me out in the direction of the street noise. As we came around toward the southwest corner, a row of raised skylights was blocking our view. I saw the shadow of something by the farthest one, a pack of gear or maybe just a garbage bag, and pointed it out to the cop next to me. I didn't even know the guy's name. We worked our way along the roof with our lights off, staying low just in case. Once we got close enough, I could see that someone was still there. He was on his knees, facing the Harmon and not moving. My Glock was up. "Police! Freeze!" I aimed low for his legs, but there was no need, as it turned out. As soon as the other officer hit him with the flashlight beam, we saw clearly the dark hole at the back of his head, washed clean by the rain. His body had lodged in the corner of the half wall that ran around the roof, holding him up that way. One look at his face, and I recognized Mitch Talley. Now suddenly my legs were like jello. This was too much. It really was. Mitch Talley was dead? How? Jesus. The patrol officer with me leaned in for a better look. What is that, 9mm? Call it in, I told him. Get an APB on Stephen Hennessy, a.k.a. Denny Humboldt. He couldn't have gotten far yet. I'll call CIC. We need to shut this neighborhood down now. Every second counts. Unless my instincts were way off here, Hennessy had just broken up the Patriot Cypher team, for whatever reasons of his own. If I were him, I would have been running like hell. I would already be out of Washington, and I'd never look back. But I wasn't Hennessy, was I?
Denny drove around for hours. He stayed north and stopped at a couple of different drugstores in Maryland. He bought a Nationals baseball cap, a shaving kit, a pair of weak reading glasses, and a box of chestnut brown hair dye. That should do it. After another stop in a Sunoco bathroom in Chevy Chase, he made his way back down to the city. He parked in Logan Circle and walked the 2 blocks over to Vermont Avenue, where the familiar black town car was waiting. Zachary gave a rare, unguarded smile as Denny slid into the back seat. "Look at you," he said, "all set to fade into the woodwork. I'll bet you're good at it, too." "Whatever," Denny said. "Let's get this done so I can fade away, as you say. Sounds as though things went off well enough, assuming the news reports are to be believed." "That's correct." Zachary stayed where he was. "They didn't say anything about an accomplice, though. Nothing about Mitch." "I'd be surprised if they did," Denny said. "This lead investigator, Cross, likes to keep his cards close to his vest. But believe me, it's taken care of. And I don't really want to talk about Mitch anymore. He did his job well." The contact man studied Denny's face a little longer. Finally, he reached over the front seat and took the pouch from the driver. It seemed right this time, but Denny unzipped the bag and checked just to be sure. Zachary sat back now and seemed to actually unclench a little. "Tell me something, Denny. What are you going to do with all that money? Besides getting a new name, I mean." Denny returned the smile. "Put it somewhere safe for starters," he said, and tucked the pouch into his jacket as if to illustrate the point. "And after that—" There was no rest of the sentence. The Walther fired from inside his pocket and caught the driver in the back of the head. A spray of blood and gray matter hit the windshield. The second shot took care of Zachary, right through those pretentious horn rims of his. He never even got to reach for the door. It was over in a matter of seconds. The 2 most satisfying shots Denny had ever taken. Except, of course, not Denny. Not anymore. That was a pretty good feeling, too. To leave this all far behind. No time for celebrations, though. The car had barely gone quiet before he was out on the sidewalk and back to doing what he'd always done best. He kept moving.
The 24 hours following the hits at the Harmon were a full-court press like I'd rarely seen in Washington. Our command information center had traffic checks going on all night. Major Case Squad put both units on the street, and NSID was told to drop all non-essential business, and that was just inside the MPD. Details were operating out of Capitol Police, ATF, and even the Secret Service. By morning, the hunt for Stephen Hennessy had gone from regional to national to international. The Bureau was fully activated and looking for him everywhere it was possible for the Bureau to look. The CIA was involved too. The significance of these murders had really started to sink in. Justices Summers and Ponte had been the unofficial left wing of the Supreme Court, beloved by half the country, and foxes in the henhouse, basically, to the other half. At MPD, our late afternoon briefing was like a march of the zombies. Nobody had got much sleep overnight, and there was a palpable kind of tension in the air. Chief Perkins presided. There were no introductory remarks. "What are we looking at?" he asked straight out. Most of the department's command staff were there too. Every seat was taken, and people were standing around the edge of the room, shifting on their feet. "Talk to me," he said. "Anyone." "The hotline and website are on fire," one of the district commanders, Jerry Hockney, reported in. "It's all over the place, literally. Hennessy's a government operative. He's holed up in a storage facility in Ohio. He's in Florida. He's in Toronto." Perkins cut him off. "Anything credible? I need to know what we have, not a lot of useless bullshit." "It's too early to say, to commit to anything. We're overwhelmed, sir." "In other words, no." "Who else?" "Alex?" I waved from where I was. "Waiting on a weapons report from that double homicide on Vermont Avenue last night. 2 John Does found shot dead in a car, with cash on them, but no IDs. It was definitely 9mm, but we don't know yet if it was the same weapon that killed Mitch Talley." A huge buzz went up around the room, and I had to shout to get everyone's attention back. "Even if it was," I went on, "the most it can tell us about Hennessy in the short term is that he was in the city sometime between 12 and 4 a.m., which means he could be anywhere by now," Sampson said, giving the shorthand version for me, "which means we should wrap this shit up and get back out there." "Do you think Hennessy was working for the 2 dead guys in the car?" someone asked anyway. "Don't know," I said. "We're still trying to track down who they were. It does seem like he's cleaning house, though. Whether or not he's finished is another question we don't have an answer for." A lieutenant in the first row spoke up. "Do you mean finished cleaning house or finished with these sniper killings?" The questions were natural, but they were starting to get on my nerves. I held my hands out in a shrug. "You tell me." "So, in other words," Chief Perkins cut in, "we're nearly 24 hours out, and we know less than we did before these murders. Is that it?" Nobody wanted to answer. There was a long silence in the room. "Something like that," I said finally. 2 more days of nerve-rattling quiet went by without much progress or any sign of Steve Hennessy, or even anyone who might know him. Then finally, there was some movement over at the Bureau. Max Siegel called me himself to tell me about it.
"We got something over the web. Anonymous, but this one checked out. There's a guy going by Francis Moulton. Supposedly fits Hennessy's description down to the toenails. He's got an apartment over on 12th, except nobody's seen him for approximately 2 months. Then this morning, someone spotted him coming out of there."
"Someone who?" I asked.
"That's the Anonymous. The super at the building backed it up, though. He hasn't seen this Moulton character in months either, but he gave me a positive ID on Hennessy's picture when I brought it over."
Either this was huge, or it just felt that way given the zeros we'd racked up until now. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference when you're desperate. "What do you want to do with this?" I asked. Whatever it meant, it was still Siegel's lead, not ours.
"I'm thinking you and I might sit up on this place for a while. See what happens. If you want, I'm game. See? I could change."
It wasn't the answer I'd expected, and my own pause spoke for itself.
"Don't bust my balls here. I'm trying to play nice."
In fact, it seemed like he was. Did I love the idea of spending the next 8 hours or more in a car with Max Siegel? Not really. But more than that, I didn't want to be on the outside of this investigation for a second. "Yeah, okay," I said. "I'm in. Where can I meet you?" Ivan brought coffee. Siegel brought some too, so there was plenty of caffeine to go around. We parked in a Bureau-issued Crown Vic on the east side of 12th Street between M and N. It was a narrow tree-lined block with a lot of construction going on, but not at the Midlands. That was Francis Moulton's place, and if we were on the right track, Stephen Hennessy's address as well. The apartment in question was on the 8th of 10 floors, with 2 large windows facing the street. They were both dark when we got there. Max and I settled in for the long haul. Once we'd said everything